and welcome to the Sunday Guardian podcast by Joyeeta Basu. Viewers, as you know, Russia's President Vladimir Putin is headed to India sometime in the first week of December. Now, this is a major visit. And you see, but for us in India, the first question that arises in our mind is that what does it mean for India? What will happen now? Given the kind of pressures that have been coming on India, primarily from the US, the 50%, basically sanctions, 50% tariff rate that we have been hit with for buying Russian oil. And we know for the last, ever since the war between Russia and Ukraine has started, the kind of pressure that India has been facing. So, what does this visit put us at a disadvantage? Also, what exactly is happening on the war front between Russia and Ukraine? What is happening inside Russia? How exactly is Mr. Trump handling it? Will it create more problem? Mr. Trump's handling of the situation or not? Now, to discuss this and much more, I've got a very special guest, John Helmer. Well, I asked him, the first thing I asked him was, how do we describe him? Describe you. He said old. But I would not use that word. I would say, you see, he has spanned the world of politics, he has spanned the world of journalism. He was in Jimmy Carter's White House. He was in the Australian PM's office. He was in the Greek PM's office. He was also special advisor who worked with the Sri Lankan President Jayawardene. He has a special advisor to Arab League, I think, and also worked with Sri Lankan PM Jayawardene. And then he went to Soviet Russia in 1989, and he was there for decades as a journalist. He was reporting from there. So it's a varied experience. Welcome to the show, Mr. Helmer.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, first question to you, of course, since you have been in Russia, since you know Russia so well, and so tell me what is happening exactly on the Russia-Ukraine war front. Because there's why is peace not happening?
Oh, well, I can give you the general answer. The general answer is the United States, the NATO allies, are fighting a long war against Russia. That war began immediately after World War II. It isn't ending. The United States and the NATO allies have tried in various ways since 1945 and before, basically since the Bolshevik Revolution. It's a 100-year war. It's more than a 100-year war. And the idea fundamentally of that war is that Russia should never be a great enough power in Europe, combined with smaller European powers, principally Germany, to threaten the hegemony, the empires, first of the British and then of the Americans. That's the long war. Russia must be destroyed. Okay? The short war is the war that goes from one battlefield to another. This, on the one hand, at the end of the Soviet Union, the collapse of communism, the US policy, the US conviction was that the United States could so thoroughly penetrate and dismantle the Soviet institutions as to replace them with an economic system, an economic class, an oligarchy, a presidential system that would be entirely subservient to US Anglo-American will. That was the peaceful phase of that war. Only it wasn't peaceful for Russians. Many millions of Russians died as a direct result of the Yeltsin administration's policies, privatization, transformation of the national budget. Millions of Russians died needlessly, lost their lives in that war. And anyone you listen to, some well-known professors from New York or Chicago who claim to have advised President Gorbachev or President Yeltsin, all the good things they advised, don't take responsibility for the murder of millions of Russian people and many millions of Russian livestock. The loss of the capability of Russian agriculture cost lives. So all of that phase of the death of Russia is over. It was rescued by the President Putin, and his success, the reason for his stable and astonishingly high popularity, is that he rescued Russia from death, from the death inflicted in that part of the war against Russia, that part of the destruction of Russia. But the other side, the adversary side, moved on to a new form of warfare. First, to see whether internal divisions, for example, in the Caucasus, the Chechen war began, encouraged by the Anglo-American strategy of breaking up by violence. When that failed, again, President Putin ended the Chechen warfare and the Chechen secession, putting an end for the time being of that strategy of war making against Russia, breaking up. I mean, I'm telling these stories of Russia, but Indian history, especially but in the history from East India Company on to, or from Portuguese Empire, French Empire, East India Company, and British Empire, you know all about the way in which internal violence can be used to split up your nation and country and break it up into pieces. That failed too. And for that, President Putin deserves the credit and gets the credit from Russian people. So what had to be done then is what we see now. A battlefield had to be created for a war fighting against Russia, and a sort of spearhead of NATO moving eastward to potentially attack Russia. And that war, that method or stage or phase of war, began in 2014 with the putsch, the military putsch that overthrew the potentially friendly but generally neutral government of Viktor Yanukovych, replace it with an entirely Anglo-American selection, and then build up over the period 2014 to 2022 the capability for 800,000 Ukrainian army behind very well-built fortifications, armed with the latest in NATO armaments to begin to threaten Russia itself. That came along with a civil war, resistance within Ukraine, within the east of the Ukraine. So in this stage of, let's say, building Ukraine as a war-fighting platform against Russia, was resisted inside Ukraine in the civil war, in which the Donbass, the peoples of the East, the Russian-speaking Orthodox peoples of the East resisted, and in which the peoples of the West of the country mounted a military campaign to destroy them. That campaign failed. And along the way, we have episodes creating let's say, the rationale, the excuse, the fabrication for NATO intervention. I hope your our audience, remembers the Malaysian MH17 flight, which was shot down in, pardon me, 2014, July 2014, and blamed on Russia. We don't need to go into the details of the story, but it's one example of a fabricated operation.
Was it a deliberate attack?
No, it was not, and nor was it a deliberate Russian attack.
Yeah.
But that episode, like the episodes that have followed, have been used to mobilize the national peoples of the NATO alliance for commitment to war. I'm referring, for example, to the entirely fabricated British Operation Novichok, the so-called chemical nerve agent drug allegedly brought into Salisbury and used to attack two Russian people in Salisbury Centre in March 2018, portrayed by Boris Johnson, then Foreign Secretary, Prime Minister Theresa May as Prime Minister, and concocted by the MI6 as a case of Russian attack on British territory. Now, there's hardly a person in Britain these days who doesn't believe Novichok was a Russian attack. It's entirely false. Write a book about it, but it doesn't matter if I produce with me or my colleagues the truth. the fact is that this was another episode designed to convince the people who were going to pay for this war in the Ukraine, the British in that case, that Russia was a threat to everyone in Europe. So the warfighting platform in Ukraine is created on the basis that Russia threatens all of Europe and is designed to attack Russia. That's just the new phase, the new war in the midst of the old war.
So you are suggesting that this was pre-decided, that there is going to be a war with Russia, and with Ukraine being the at the center of it, kind
Yes.
of.
Short answer, yes.
Okay, that's very interesting. No, but at the same time, when we look at the course of the war in the last 4 years, almost 4 years, it's going to be
Yes.
4 years in February, it is a fact to us from India. It seems like Putin's or Russia's mighty military machine is not being able to achieve its objective to the extent that Ukraine seems to be. I mean, say for example, the drone attacks that happened on Russian
Yes.
airbase and all. Ukraine is looks like it is kind of holding up pretty well. And it seems the Russian mighty machine is not being able to achieve the gains that it had hoped to achieve. Would you agree with that?
No, I wouldn't. But I'm not saying you've made a mistake. I'd simply put it around differently. Imagine if India had to fight the entire world. India's military successes are well known to you, and I don't need to refer to them. But imagine that your successes against Pakistan were multiplied by the rest of the Western alliance, so that when you fought your wars against the warfighting platform in Pakistan against you, you then faced the entire accumulated military skill, military procurement, military machinery of the entire Western alliance. Imagine what that would be like. It wouldn't generate a quick victory, would it? Realistically speaking, and I have to admit that there may have been, and there was, an overestimation and overconfidence on the Russian side that the Ukrainian threat, military threat, could be neutralized quickly and easily. That was an underestimation. Call it a mistake. Nonetheless, I would say the Russian military learns rather quicker than most militaries from their mistakes. But it's important, and I shouldn't avoid it, to admit that mistakes were made. The mistake at the beginning was delay. The first strategic mistake was to wait too long to allow the Western allies to build such a defensive fortification that the cost on the Russian side of combating that fortification became higher and higher. That's a strategic mistake. Delay is always a strategic mistake when you're under attack. First. Second, there was an operational mistake. The operational mistake was thinking that the special military operation could achieve a short victory by, one, deploying a very small force against a very large one. You don't deploy small forces against very large ones. Under the rules of war, you're bound to be defeated. But the theory of the Russian special military operation at the beginning was that a small force in the east, relatively small, combined with a lightning special operation in Kiev, would cause the collapse of the Zelensky regime on the civilian side, pardon me, and a change of mind on the general staff and the Ukrainian side. And that operation was tested in the Battle of Gostomel or the Battle of Antonov Airport, in which a skilled group of Russian special forces landed to achieve what was the idea was a military component of a change of government, a putsch, a counter-putsch, if you consider that the first one in 2014 in Kiev was the US one which succeeded. Unfortunately, the Ukrainian-American, Anglo-American alliance knew the Russians were well prepared, and the Russian forces were killed. The operation was a disaster. From that defeat came a strengthening commitment on the allied, Western allied part and the Ukrainian regime's part that they could win the military contest. First. Second, President Putin decided that this was an opportune time to take from that defeat the victory on the negotiating table. So Istanbul I, convened between March and April of that year, 2022, was designed to achieve, pardon me, by agreement and negotiation, terms that would minimize the threat for the short war period. I'm speaking, it's always very clear to the Russian side. This is all temporary. We understand the root causes of the conflict, a long war against Russia to break it up. But given that the Battle of Antonov Airport failed, given that there'd been no overturn of change of Ukrainian regime, given that there was increasing confidence on the part of the Johnson and US administrations on either side of the Atlantic, Putin went to peace talks in Istanbul. And those were designed to achieve by negotiation what overturning the government in the Ukraine had failed to achieve. Now, those negotiations reached a pact. We can get into it later because we see some of the elements of that pact rehearsed in these most recent days. Okay, but before we get there, let me try and address your question. What happens then is that both sides, not simply the Ukrainian Anglo-American side, but the Russian side, can't agree to the terms on paper. So fight it must be. Then the dynamics and also the disadvantages of the Russian special military operation come into play. We don't have enough men. We don't have enough readiness compared to what we faced. Therefore, the overestimation, overconfidence factor is eliminated very quickly. And Russia then has to do some things which were new. It has to remilitarize. It has to build weapon supply systems, logistics, military industry faster than the other side can deliver to the Ukrainian side. It has to learn how to defeat every anti-aircraft defensive system, land defense, air defense, naval defense system on the other side, the Western side can deploy. We have the introduction, unique in warfighting, of drones, and drones of all kinds. Completely changed the artillery doctrine, the defense doctrine. All of these things are brand new. And in that conflict, we're looking at a war, at a battlefield in which the entire, let's say, military skill and military capital of the entire world is arrayed against the Russian side. Now, you raised an issue of your Indian perception that the Russian side has been underperforming. What I'm trying to say is that's a snapshot of one period or one episode at a time. What I'm offering you is a video film, a continuous film of Russian improvement, Russian learning, at a terrible cost in blood. There's no doubt about that. The cost in blood of the Russian side, it mustn't be underestimated. It's nothing like the exaggerated numbers that come out of Washington, but it's more than 100,000 people, 100,000 men. That means a very large number, millions and millions of Russian families have directly suffered. So the cost to Russia of learning from its mistakes, of fighting this war forced on it, is very great. But to answer your specific question, Joyeeta, the successes have been extraordinary considering the stakes and the relation between the parties. Russia's military machine, as you called it, has defeated every weapon system put on the field by the Americans, the British, the Swedes, the French, and so on. Every one. Patriot missile system defeated. German Leopard tank defeated. We don't need to go on. This is not a victory song. It's a demonstration that over this time, as you said, 4 years, Russia has demonstrated a military capacity on the battlefield and a military capacity in support, in supply, in production of artillery shells and all the measures you need to have to wage war against the world. Russia has succeeded.
So, why is peace not coming? How long will this fight it out will continue? Because the conditions that we are talking about, because Ukraine is also suffering greatly in terms of civilian numbers.
Yes.
So the thing is, you see, when we are talking about territory, where exactly is the problem that Russia, Putin wants that region under, whatever territory Russia has been able to take till now, that should stay with Russia. And it seems Mr. Trump is agreeable to it, although there is a lot of pressure building inside the US also. If you can explain where exactly it's getting stuck.
Well, I need to unpack. It's a very good question. It's just difficult, and we don't have enough time to answer the pieces.
No, please answer.
Where shall we begin? How to say? Where shall we begin?
We can extend the podcast.
No, I'm not worried about the time. On the one hand, you began with why isn't peace achieved already? The answer that I can give you simply, the other side doesn't want peace. Remember, not to rehash what I've just said, the other side, the adversary side, wants to continue the war against Russia from 100 years to 200 years if necessary, until Russia is destroyed, until Russia surrenders and capitulates to a degree that the Yeltsin administration didn't do. It isn't enough. So we won't have peace because the root causes of the war that I've explained have not been accomplished to the satisfaction of the other side. One. Two, nothing in the loss of Ukrainian lives is material to the West in fighting the war. The Ukrainians and their lives are proxies. They're disposable elements, in this war. It doesn't matter how much the Ukrainians suffer from the West. It matters on the pages of Western newspapers. Look at the suffering. Pay more. Allow your taxes to be taken. Lose your hospital so that our country can support the war fight against the evil Russians. That's a propaganda notion. The fact is the Ukraine is half the size, not by Russian infliction of casualties, but they have run away. They've run away from a ruined state. They've moved into Europe. They've moved all over the world, and they won't come back. Win or lose, the Ukrainian people have left their country. And Russia has not sought, President Putin has repeatedly spoken of the brotherhood of the Ukrainian and Russian peoples, that ethnically they're not different. Well, that's true of Eastern Ukraine and Russia. But Ukraine is now half the size because Russian military tactics were designed to discourage Ukrainians from staying, and they fled. And the country's half the size, first. Second, the mobilization of Ukrainian forces that have generated the massive casualties is a policy of the West. A policy of the West to sacrifice their lives in a hopeless fight against a superior enemy. They call it an enemy, Russian forces. And they go on losing those lives. And while you can accept that there's an argument over what the degree of casualty rate is, it's 10 Ukrainians to 1 Russian soldier, at least. But you can read it each day. The Russian Defense Ministry puts out a bulletin of each day's operation, summarizing the day before through the night. And whether one agrees on the exact number of casualties along each of the 5 army group regions, the fact is that yesterday, somewhere between 1,500 and 1,700 lives, Ukrainian lives, were destroyed. And that's 10 or 15% higher than 2 months ago. which in turn was 10 or 15% higher than the previous period. So what am I saying here? Well, I'm saying the rate of loss of life on the Ukrainian side is rising, and yet they don't surrender. They don't reach terms. Why? And then we come back to your question, Joyeeta. Why don't they reach terms? Well, we've got a history since 2021 of the Ukrainians wishing to reach terms. After all, Zelensky was elected on making peace with Russia. Remember that? Complete flip-flop. The Ukrainians don't meet terms because it's not part of Anglo-American warfighting strategy. So last week, when the U.S. Army Secretary, Mr. Driscoll, shows up in Kiev with General Randy George, the U.S. Army Chief of Staff, and General Donahue, the U.S. Army Commander for Europe, and they tell Zelensky, sorry, mate, we can't protect you from this level of loss. They're telling him what they could have told him last year, the year before. They have no, and they told him, we can't supply the air defense requirements that you've been asking for, more Patriot missiles, more this or that. We can't supply what you need to defend. That's made to look in the Western press these last days as if it's a US ultimatum. Actually, the US, in sending a real delegation of operational generals plus an army, a civilian head, are really saying what was obvious months and years ago. They're not giving up the war against Russia. What they're telling Zelensky is sign our piece of paper to make the appearance of a peace so we can get on with preparing for the next stage of the war. This isn't an admission or an agreement on the American side to get to the root causes of the war. This isn't an agreement with the Russian side. It's not an agreement on any Russian terms. It's an ultimatum to Zelensky to save himself or die, because the US doesn't want to appear to have lost this war on the battlefield, as indeed they are losing. That it is not appropriate for a president of the United States to run away in defeat. Go on.
So do you think, what role is Trump playing right now? Is he actually serious? Because Trump had come on that plank that I'm going to stop the Russia-Ukraine war in 24 hours. Is he serious about ensuring that there is peace?
Well, pardon me. The general question of is President Trump serious relates to a neurological condition. Is that what you meant? A rhetorical condition or presidential policy-making capability? Those are all things that are in doubt about Donald Trump. On the other hand, what can we say about the through line, the consistency of this particular president? And here I have to, I suppose, put on my old, totally obsolete Carter administration hat, and our audience can discount what I'm saying as past American nostalgia, if you like. President Trump thinks and has said he wins wars. On the deck of the USS Harry Truman on the anniversary, the birthday of the US Navy a few weeks ago, he said the US won World War I, World War II, and all the wars before and all the wars after. That's what Trump said. I think he believes it. Second, he said, we would have won Vietnam if we'd continued fighting properly, but it was politically incorrect to do so. We would have won Afghanistan if not for the Biden administration's cowardice. He didn't exactly say that, but that's more or less what he said. What is he really saying? He has a conception of himself as a winner through violence, if necessary. His favorite word is obliteration. He used that word 8 times in the press announcement of how successful their bombing raid was against the Iranian nuclear installations a few months back. That was an uncontested air raid. The Iranians didn't fire anything at them. The US succeeded in obliterating installations without the success they sought, which was to end the capacity of the Iranians to make nuclear weapons in defense of themselves. But obliteration as a fake, as a performance, plus win-win-win as a false history, these are the slogans, the tokens, the jingles, the mottos of this particular president, who doesn't have intelligence briefings every day, as almost all his predecessors of our time have had. Instead, he sees pictures because he doesn't read. If you have a look, I don't know if our audience want to be bothered, but all the presidents, and certainly the one I served, Jimmy Carter, had an Oval Office for ceremony. I don't care whether, it's not important that President Trump gilds every corner of the Oval Office and makes it look like sort of mini Versailles. That's not important. The president doesn't do his thinking there. He does his thinking off the side door in a study, the president's study. In Carter's day, the president's study was surrounded by bookshelves. Why? Because there were books and papers on them, and there were papers on his desk. Yeah, that was the president's study in those days. And that was connected by an inner door to the National Security Advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who mesmerized Carter very regrettably. But let's leave that aside. Focus on the bookshelves in the president's study. Now, the New York Times a couple of weeks ago published a picture of Trump's study. You know what it's become? It's become a shop. On the shelves, not a single piece of paper. It's merchandise. Trump for 28 hats, MAGA, Trump for MAGA hats, perfumes with Trump names on them. I forgot to list all the commodities got for sale. And he shows foreign visitors into this study, shows it off. Think about that. Think about it. The President of the United States shows off souvenirs which he hands out to state visitors, proving to them there's not a paper on the desk, there isn't a computer, there isn't a thinking device. Now, I think we should conclude this president can't think as we all try to do by the standard of neurology, by the standard of logic, by the standard of policy making, by our legal standards. He doesn't think like that. So the consequence is, and I'm not saying anything new at all, everybody, Prime Minister Modi, President Xi, the leaders of Europe, all understand this is the way the man works. They understand his vanity has to be ingratiated and appeased. They understand the limitations, his short attention span, how not to continue to talk at him because he can't follow any longer and he doesn't want to. His potentially aggressive and violent impulses. They understand all these things, and they think Trump is a great opportunity to achieve their interests. However, Trump has come up with a bunch of aggressive economic warfare techniques, the tariff war. It's warfare, okay? Russia's not the only victim of sanctions. What are called sanctions for Russia are called tariffs for India, right? So we're talking about a unique president who's both vulnerable, he can't ever be seen to lose, find the way to inflict a loss on Trump, and he retreats. In fact, he runs away. He runs away from the mayor of New York if the resistance is high enough to inflict a defeat. He runs away from the shores of Venezuela when the Venezuelans put up a potential resistance that would cause loss. He will run away from Iran, and he will run away from the Ukraine, which brings us back to your point. He is running away while covering with a smokescreen, with camouflage, exactly how he's doing it. How to make lose, lose, lose look like win, win, win. That's what everybody in our audience can understand today when they read the Western newspapers. And don't be fooled by it.
Now, so it seems that peace is not happening in the near future. Would you agree with that?
Not exactly. It's A peace on US terms
Will not happen.
Isn't a peace on Russian terms. So the issue for the Russian side is what kind of bad deal can be accepted to achieve a pause that serves Russian interest. Never mind allowing Trump to grandstand at a peace summit as fake as the Sharm el-Sheikh Gaza meeting. Russia is indifferent to whether Trump gets the new Nobel Peace Prize. We all understand that every one of his so-called ceasefire peacemaking efforts are fake, and we don't need to go through each of them. However, peace means, from Russian side, the conservation of its fundamental security interests. And they were spelled out, have been repeatedly spelled out by President Putin in language everyone can understand. But even before the war began, the Russian Foreign Ministry made a last-ditch attempt to say to the other side, here are two treaties of mutual non-aggression and reciprocal security. They produced two pacts. They published them December 17, 2021. If people at home want to look them up, take a look at them. This was the last effort that Russia made to say to the United States, these are the terms of peace that would end the long war. They were summarily dismissed by Biden administration within weeks, and we're on the inevitable road to the war we're in now. So peace means something different, Joyeeta, depending on the clock. The clock you also got to consider. And I would say, without getting into the small print, the vague small print that fills the newspapers at the moment, I have to say that, to repeat what Deputy Foreign Minister Ryabkov said yesterday, there is no acceptance on the Russian part of concessions or an approach that conflicts with the underlying Russian interests here.
When you're talking about the clock, is the West hoping that the clock is ticking for Putin? Primarily, if you're looking at, I'm asking about the situation, given that the war has been almost 4 years, the prolonged war, how do the Russian people feel about Putin right now? Is the West's hope that they will rise up against him? Is it working? What exactly is going on inside Russia?
Okay, let's see. First, one word for the way you quoted the Western belief. It's baloney. It's a false hope that Russian people will rise up against President Putin for failing at war. In fact, the opinion polls, which are perfectly reliable, show a strict correlation. I was once a sociologist. Strict correlations are valuable if you can find them. This one's unique. The high level of Russian support for the Russian army is as high and as stable as the high level and stable support for President Putin. Remember, in terms of public approval of his job performance, it's in the 80 percentile, between 79 and 87% approval. Nobody in Europe, and certainly nobody in the United States, gets that sort of stable. And its level of approval, it's correlated with the performance and confidence in the Russian army. So winning on the battlefield, defending the country, is what people think Putin is doing, and they also value what he's done to save Russia from the economic warfare wreaked on it by Yeltsin.
Can those polls be trusted?
Yes, they can. These polls show. I've been married in Russia. I lived in Russia. I have a home in Russia. I've lived for long enough, since '89, since the collapse of the Soviet Union. To be sure, I live in Moscow, a highly privileged center, a wealthy center of the country. I understand how different Moscow conditions are from my family in-law in Tomsk in southeastern Siberia, I do understand the difference between Russian poverty, Russian weakness at home, and the benefits of living in Moscow. Anyone who goes to Moscow will be astonished at how normal, privileged, clean life is in that city. But money buys that, and also Putin policy to conduct a war that hasn't damaged the domestic economy. What damages the domestic economy in Russia is the central bank of Russia's key interest rate. Nobody runs a national economy with key interest rate at between 16% and 21%, but that's what the central bank of Russia is doing, without bothering everybody with a little discussion about Russian politics. The principal concern in Russia is high interest rates deterring reinvestment, deterring employment, and improved wages and improved spending power. That's far more important to the Russian consumer, the Russian voter, than the impact of sanctions. Sanctions have done Russia a great favor, increasing domestic, or what you call indigenization in India, of all the things on which Russia depended from 91 on. But the support for the war shouldn't be misunderstood. It's also support for peacemaking. It's also support for negotiations. So if our audience would like to go to Dances with Bears, the website I run, I do try every so often, but regularly, to analyze the opinion polling that's done. And the opinion polling that's done convinces me that on the one hand, there's this unique coalition between confidence in the army, confidence in the president, losing on the battlefield, a peace agreement of a, quotes, immediate ceasefire type, in which the army withdraws, will be very unfavorably received by Russian voters, and it would impact on presidential public popularity and support. One. Two, the polls show, especially Russian women, but more Russian women than Russian men, favor peace negotiations, but not a bad deal, not a disadvantageous deal on Russian terms. Peacemaking negotiations are entirely supported in Russia, but that's not a carte blanche. So Russian public opinion is intelligent and reasonable. Russians can read, even if President Trump can't read. And so the public support for the present negotiations on peace will depend on what the terms are. Now, it's very important for the Kremlin to have public support that the Kremlin is doing everything possible to reach an agreement on terms Russia can live with, not die by. So you see it every day. President Putin says it's not a rhetoric for the West. It's an appeal to Russian public opinion. I'm in favor of negotiations. I support President Trump's attempts to end this war. That's what Russians want to believe to be true. But they can be persuaded that Trump's a liar, or a fool, or a grandstander, or a madman. They can be persuaded not by rhetoric, but by the proof. And the proof of this particular pudding is in the detail of the negotiations. So if a bunch of US generals and an army secretary come back, accompanied by a real estate bagman like Vitkov, and come to Moscow and dictate terms which are a defeat for all the Russian gains in this victory to date, then Russian public opinion will not misunderstand and cannot be persuaded by propaganda that a bad deal was necessary. So I hope that explains that, yes, there's support for peace negotiations. No, there is no support for a bad deal, and that public opinion links support for the army with support for the presidency.
And Putin is secure.
Secure in that sense, yes, but subject to criticism, subject to difference of opinion. People who want to imagine Russia as a dictatorship, an authoritarian country, don't understand the way France is working now. They don't understand that Russia is democratic in its special way, in a particular way. War-making and peacemaking in Russia is a collective decision-making process. President Putin tries to show that. It's shown symbolically by the meetings with the Security Council roughly every week. It's shown by his going to the front and having meetings with military commanders and listening to them. He doesn't stand on an aircraft carrier and make grandstanding statements like the US president. We have collective decision making on all these key decisions. Before the negotiators went to Istanbul, there was a significant Kremlin meeting of all those involved, and the president can only risk making mistakes if he doesn't achieve consensus. So when you say, is President Putin secure? I would say President Putin is secure in the decision-making consensus in Moscow. That's not a one-man show.
Okay. Now, I want to come to this part of the world, specifically in terms of now that President Putin is coming to India. You talked about Russian economy is doing fine. One of the charges that is being hurled at India in particular, not so much at China, although China buys more Russian oil than we do, is that we are fueling Russia's war economy. One of the reasons why Putin's economy, Russia's economy is doing fine is India. This oil buying that's happening. We are being asked to stop buying that oil, and we have apparently, seems like, started diversifying as well. So, how is it going to affect Russia if India reduces buying Russia's oil, and maybe China also sometime in the future? If US, there is a problem between US and China in terms of a trade deal.
Well, let's be clear. India faces a higher degree of punishment from the United States than China. Let's be clear that the so-called punishment sanction for Rosneft and Lukoil, and for any country or refinery in the world buying crude oil from those Russian sources, will be punished by the United States. Let's be clear who the exemptions are already. After meeting with President Xi in Korea, it was said that there was no discussion of oil. No discussion of oil. But then Trump said on the aircraft coming home, in the inimitable way in which he makes policy, comes to the back of an airplane, takes 7 minutes of questions, and then disappears into the front. He said, I'm exempting China from this sanction. China needs the oil for the northern regions of China. He gave some reason, not exactly an untrue reason, but it showed a logic, a sense. China needs the oil. We need China for more reasons than we need to punish them on the oil. So he exempted China. You might notice that Turkey is never mentioned. Turkey also is a big consumer of Russian oil, also, like India, converts Russian oil into oil products and then sends them on to Europe, just like India does. Have you heard Trump punish or threaten to punish Turkey for the same? No. That means that, like China, Trump is afraid of the damage Turkey could retaliate with were it to be subjected to a significant economic blow. So the threat to India is a US calculation that India is more vulnerable to punishment, therefore Trump can get away with it. It's a gangster, extortionist, street gang mentality. We will pick on the weaker guy on the street and punish him or threaten him. But India isn't so weak. One. And India will come back with its national interest solution to this problem. And we don't have to get into the number of ways, ingenious Indian and Indo-Russian trade will find the workaround against this American sanction. Second, Mr. Modi is more than capable, on the one hand, of appeasing Trump like all do, including President Xi, including President Putin, but certainly Starmer, Macron, Merz, and the others in Europe. Prime Minister Modi can do all those things, but on the other hand, he can show that India can diversify away from Russian oil. It can conceal and trade with Russia to both sides' satisfaction and defeat the sanction, as all other sanctions have been defeated, and prove that India isn't the patsy that Trump thinks. Okay, that's the second point. Third point, a number of Western podcasters dismiss this sanction as having no effect on Russia. That's an exaggeration that's unfortunate and not true. On the one hand, this sort of sanction does do damage. If you read the propaganda news agencies, Reuters, Bloomberg, and the rest, they document each day or week the cancellation of this contract or that contract, and the number of tankers that have turned around or slowed or not delivered. That's a day-by-day snapshot. A snapshot that turns out to be false. Over time, workaround works. But in a short period of time, Russia might sell less oil to the Indian side. India might buy oil elsewhere, just as it did before it increased its purchase of Russian oil. India behaves in a national interest, a commercial national interest way with regard to the price of oil. If the Russian price goes down enough, India will find a way to buy it. But in the meantime, there'll be a reduction of revenue on the Russian side. Will that make any difference to Russia's warfighting capability? None at all. So, to the issue of that you raised, does buying Russian oil contribute to Russia's war-making capability? The answer is this is the wrong analysis of why Russia's at war. Russia's at war because it had this war forced on it. It's not new. The ability to fight the war on this platform, on this battlefield, is the new part. The fight for survival is the old part. Russia has no choice. Therefore, it will make whatever sacrifice is needed at the time, in the circumstances. So nothing the enemy side thinks up will deter Russia from defending itself. That's so fundamental. It must be obvious to everybody. If Russian oil revenues go down, where are we today? 4 years? We're not 4 years. Since 2014, the theory of sanctions war, economic warfare against Russia, has been a prevailing doctrine. You can cut off the economy. You can close its outlets to the export markets. You can do this, you can do that. Napoleon and the English tried during the Napoleonic Wars to put cordons around each other's trade, and they failed. What did not fail was military action on the battlefield. And military action on the battlefield will be supported by whatever sacrifice is required domestically.
Now, when it comes to India-Russia relations, there is this defense aspect, and that is the central aspect when it comes to India-Russia relations. Now, for its own interest, let's put it this way, there is a view here that we shouldn't be putting all our eggs in one basket, and that is the reason we should diversify, and we have started diversifying when it comes to purchase of arms. And given the situation that you talked about, obviously there is a supply chain disruption because of the war fighting that is happening in Russia.
Yes.
What is the way forward for India-Russia relations when it comes to this particular defense aspect?
Good question. Thank you for asking. Let's start with your point. Yes, we agree. India must not, does not, Prime Minister Modi does not put all of India's eggs in one basket. However, you don't put rotten eggs in your basket either. And the problem that India faces and must always ask with respect to defense cooperation with the French, Italians, the Germans, and the Americans, and the British is whether their defense systems are cheap, effective, and lack the kill switch. The kill switch is the rotten part of your egg, and you can't afford to accept defense cooperation, military procurement from governments that can prevent you using that equipment for your operational requirements, but can hit a kill switch that destroys the capability of that weapon. The kill switch can be used in various ways, a halt to supply of spare parts, and various other ways in which defense cooperation with a partner can be rendered useless in wartime, in operational requirements. You also have to calculate cost of buying the unit, let's say the Sukhoi 57, the new fighter that Russia is offering on better price terms. You have to consider whether the support systems for enabling that aircraft, or the French aircraft, or the other alternatives to turn around and fly sorties. You just flew a sortie westward, you come down. How long does it take? How many technicians are required to fit the aircraft for turning around and flying again? That turnaround, the maintenance, the supply system, all of those things, you have the experts to judge. Okay? And in my understanding of the evidence, I'm not a procurement expert, okay? Just a journalist. I'm not here to market Russian equipment. But I'd say there's an overwhelming consensus on the Indian side that Russia is a more reliable partner than the others. You shouldn't have all eggs in one basket, but the other eggs include rotten ones. Okay, what do you do with to test eggs that you've had for a while? You put them in water, and I've forgotten whether the rotten ones float and the good ones sink. I think that's the formula. It's been a while since I boiled an egg. That's what you do with your defense arrangements, and that's what you've had accepted by the Russian side for generations now. So the reliability factor there has lots of elements to it. That's why it's central. And the Russian side and the Indian side both face a common strategic problem. There's an enemy on every one of your borders. So fast, reliable, cost-effective operational qualities of the weapon systems, the defensive and the offensive weapon systems that you buy, must serve your multi-front war problem.
Well, Russia also is a friends with China and has been supplying things like S-400, for instance. And
S-400 was extremely effective in Operation Sindoor.
Yeah, but there's also a view that, not view, I'm told even the Russians have been saying this, that in case of in case of a conflict between, kinetic conflict between India and China, which side will Russia support? And we have been told that Russia is going to be neutral. Then doesn't that supply of arms become a problem for India?
Well, pardon me, I don't know how Russia behaved during the border clashes between India and China, which is the only effective evidence to supply to your question in a way. Russia is both neutral and actively neutral in seeking to mitigate conflicts of that kind between India and China. And you've seen plenty of evidence of that at the presidential or the summit stage and at the working group stage. Russia would seek to minimize conflict between India and China, and encourage India and China to see their best interests facing the bigger enemy now. for both. The bigger enemy has manifested itself for India when the United States adopted Pakistan as it once adopted its favorite fighting platform. Pakistan has become, for India, a Ukraine warfighting platform against India, but at the same time, Pakistan is for the Americans warfighting platform against Iran, warfighting platform against Afghanistan, and completely supplanting and becoming antagonistic to the long Chinese attempt to build a relationship with Pakistan. You might say it's a strategic defeat for China. You might say that on the Indian side could say, we told you so. This is the way Pakistan and India were. This is the way Pakistan and India will always be. The Chinese have made a mistake to think otherwise. If the Chinese made a mistake to think of Pakistan in this way, perhaps the Chinese can be persuaded to think that they're making a mistake with India, that India, China, and Russia as a troika move faster across the snow than two horses or one horse.
I'll end with what I started with when we are talking about the disadvantages for India. I mean, while Mr. Putin's visit we welcome, but there is also the disadvantage of this particular visit being seen as being anti-West, and for India a lot of pressure might come in. So what exactly would you say this visit is more advantageous for Mr. Putin than for Mr. Modi?
I wouldn't say that, Joyeeta, and it would be premature ejaculation, wouldn't it, to try to characterize the summit meeting before it's happened. It's been long in preparation. Certainly what you say is important, and I'm sure, or I hope, that the Russian side understand that Prime Minister Modi will be damned by the Americans if he does one thing, and damned by the Russian side if he does another thing. He must do the balancing act. It's very important, and good politicians know how to balance. It doesn't mean that they lie out of both sides of their mouth. Second, President Putin does need to demonstrate the viability, the durability of the BRICS in larger measure. But the BRICS is at core the troika. Russia, China, and India are solidarity facing the wars against each of them. There's no doubt that the United States aims to sequence its wars. This is one of the doctrines developed at the Pentagon since the Trump administration came in. Don't overdo the Ukraine war fighting. Let the Europeans continue to do that at our profit, at the US profit. We face the strategic enemy is China. The priority enemy of the United States is China. They say it. They act that way. The Chinese can't be in any doubt about that. To the extent that that's the case, China, India, and Russia represent a unique combination to deter the Americans from thinking that they can sequence from one no-win, no-lose war to another one. So from an Indian point of view, from a Russian point of view, this is an opportunity for saying something that won't be exactly published. It's to come up with the unique, inventive, ingenious means on in trade, in investment, in transportation and logistics, in defense and security that deters the Americans from thinking they will pull the surprises, that they hold the initiative, that they have escalation control, escalation dominance on India's borders. You must surprise them, the United States, on each of your warfighting fronts. Russia must do the same and must assist you and will assist you. That's what strategic partnership means. In turn and in return, Russia facing war on all its fronts, we've run out of time to describe them all, you have the opportunity to reinforce Russia's capability to deter the United States, the Anglo-Americans, the Nato allies, and their other allies of believing they can get away with exercising their initiative against Russia on all those fronts. So we can end on the point either Russia, India, and China hang together, or the United States will see that we hang separately.
Yeah, but then from India's point of view, China is a problem, definitely.
Of course, and we haven't had time, and I'm not your expert for that. What I've suggested is there are now unique incentives which the United States have presented for you to figure out, not unilaterally, of course, with the Chinese, what's the basis, what's the common interest, what are the priorities strategically, operationally, and so forth, to turn the very substantial trading relationship you have with China into a situation in which China is not the security risk and the preoccupation on that front, such that you can live in peace. It's a fancy and hopeful formula, but let's just say that the opportunity now is pressing to find the way in which India can achieve its maximum national interest in both the Chinese direction and the Russian direction without the suspicion that Russia would go against you.
Thank you. Thank you, John, so much. I hope I really enjoyed the conversation.
And I have too.
Okay. And thank you, viewers, for watching. Until the next time.